Hello, friends. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by the Contour Next One blood glucose meter and Touched by Type 1. Go to touchedbytype1.org or contournext1.com to find out more. Today, I bring to you a tour de force in podcasting. 2 guests able to speak at the same time. What's that you say? That's different, Scott. Yes, it is. Kristin and Jeff are on the show today. They're parents of a child with type 1. Their parents, Kristin and Jeff, are... Let me get a drink. Let me just start over here. Kristin and Jeff are on the show today. They are parents of young Tess, who has type 1 diabetes, and they're up for some deep conversation. So this one I loved it. I hope you do too. Please remember while you're listening that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Please always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. All right, settle in. There's a lot of goodness in this one. Ooh, here comes the end of the music. Boom, boom. I love it. Bum, 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 bum.
This is fun. You actually talk back. Like when we're listening to you in the car, I'm like, but. Now I'm like, oh, he's right here.
Let me just say, I think it's really positive that I don't speak back to you while you're listening to the podcast.
Right. Okay.
But, yeah, I mean, your doctors would be thrilled to know that that's not happening, I think.
I think
So we are already recording, and in a second, I'll just ask you to introduce yourself. You guys were interesting in as much as that you had a fairly cogent idea for what you wanted to talk about on the podcast, yet the podcast never really have cogent plan.
Yeah, plus that was 6 months ago too.
Yeah, so. I'm hoping you forgot.
No. We did. We made notes. We got into conversation last night about it. That's about as much planning as you're going to get from us.
I think that's perfect. I think that the reason there are a lot of podcasts that nobody listens to is because they try to make everything perfect and feels like they're reading, So, you know what? I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, but I don't want to lose the thread for a moment. Okay, you know what? No, forget it. Go ahead and introduce yourselves first.
Well, actually, can I ask a couple of housekeeping questions super quick?
Yeah, sure.
So, I have a 1:00 appointment, and so I have to kind of leave at 12:30, 12:45. What's your feel on that? What's your read
Oh God, if we're not done by 12 or 12:15.
Right, okay, that's what I was sort of wanting to make sure.
Oh, let me be certain to tell you that if we're not done by 12 or 12:15, one of us is woefully us up.
Okay, which is a great segue into my second question. We're not allowed to cuss, right?
Right, I can't curse. I mean, if you really feel it, let it go. I'll beep it out. Right. I don't have a problem. To be perfectly honest with you, if you curse on iTunes, it eliminates a bunch of countries. And so I don't curse so that I can have a more worldwide show. I would love to curse. Most of my life is cursing. And if I did an episode the way I normally speak, I honestly believe no one would listen to it, or I'd have a completely different group of people as an audience. I'd lose
a sailor mouth too, so I got to kind of watch it. So.
You have no idea. Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's these poor souls in Eritrea that wonder why they can't get their basal rates correct.
India actually is one of the places, and there's a lot
of people.
You'd be surprised where the podcast is listened to. It's kind of crazy. Anyway.
That's great. I think that's awesome.
There was actually a really big study that just came out of India. It was 41. I was only 41, but T1D kids and families were looked at in India. I thought it was really interesting. Anyway, whatever. All right,
please.
Here we go.
Introduce yourselves.
I am Kristin Harkey, and
I am Jeff Johansson.
Okay.
Okay.
Hold on. No, wait. You see, already I'm there. Kristin, you didn't want his last name, or he didn't want you to have it, or you were just like, I love the Harkey name. We're not married. What's the deal?
No, we're definitely married. We've been married 12 years, and I just have always been Kristin Harkey, and so I just figured I would navigate through this life being Kristin Harkey.
I have to admit, I agree with you. My wife wanted to keep her maiden name, and we were so young, I kind of pouted about it. I think that's the only reason she has my last name. I think if she would have said the same thing to me 5 years later, I would have just been like, yeah, whatever, I don't care.
Yeah, we all grow. We all change.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so Kristin and Jeff, married for 12 years. Any kids?
Yeah, so we have the one. We're one and done. Her name is Tess, and she is a third grader. And she was diagnosed when she was 4, so just in preschool. So we're coming up on our 5th year as T1D parents.
Tuss like Robitussin or?
No, Tess like
Tess. Oh,
like Tesla.
Oh my God. No, your accent got me there for a second.
Oh gosh, it really comes out, doesn't it? Oh no.
I thought Kristin just like put that kid's name into a letter generator, and they're like, let's call her Tuss. I just figured Jeff was drunk when you asked, and he was like, yeah, that's fine. Tuss
Sure.
is it is. All right, so Tess is in 4th grade now?
She's in third. And she was diagnosed at age 4.
That's where
in
the 4.
January, right after her birthday.
That's where the 4 came from in my mind.
Yeah.
January, what year?
2010.
You guys have been at this for a while.
2014.
Well, 2014. Oh, right.
2010, she was born.
December 2010, born January 2014.
2014, diagnosed. And you guys are drinking Robitussin, not naming your kid Robitussin. I got it. No, I'm joking.
At least we went with that instead of Rob.
All right.
Okay, so all right. So first of all, I mad respect on the one kid thing. I think it's a brave and
well, we were a little late to the game. I was 35 when she was born, so that was part of the reason too.
I see. I understand.
We took our sweet time.
Well, and we were both working. We were really in kind of full career mode for a long time. And I was working in an executive track kind of nonprofit environment. And Jeff has been a veterinarian and in emergency care forever.
19 years.
19 years.
Jeff,
yeah.
Veterinarian and the emergency care is centered around animals. You're not like a dual citizen doctor or something?
Small animals.
Small, okay. No kidding.
Mostly cats and dogs.
How many times do you see a small animal that's hurt in an emergency situation that you look at, smile at the owner, and go, "Just give us a second," and then you close the door and think, "I can't help this animal"? Is it like do they?
Well, you don't start from that point of view. I mean, they you try to get a good assessment, a good judgment about what's doable, help them with the options, and just be there. So I don't do emergency anymore. I've kind of transitioned out of that, but I did work as an emergency vet for 17 years.
And for the first decade of our marriage, he was working overnights and weekends. And so for those first couple of years of Tess's diagnosis, that was really rough, where it was like he wasn't there, but then he was there in other moments. So, yeah.
Did you feel like you couldn't sleep when you were by yourself with her there?
Sometimes sleep is not a problem of mine typically.
And this would have been pre-Dexcom too.
Yeah, this was pre those days. Those seem like the Wild West to us now.
Roll the dice and hope she wakes up.
Yeah.
I've had that thought. Like I've walked back into the bedroom before Dexcom. My wife's like, "How's it looking?" I'm like, "I think she's gonna make it till tomorrow." And
right.
Beyond that, I can't make any promises.
Yeah.
Laughter. Yeah.
It really is strange to think. Like once you've seen a quick fall on a CGM graph and you think back to when you didn't have one, you think that happened before I knew how fast it was falling. Like what stopped it before, you know?
Yeah.
I know this is off topic for a second, but I'm just wildly interested by this for some reason. And Jeff, if I don't ask you, I think it'll stick in my head the whole time we're talking. How frequently do people not do things with their pets because of cost that the animal needs? Does that happen a lot or not particularly?
It does happen. I think, there's a lot of pet owners out there, and not everybody's necessarily in financial position for themselves or for their own families, much less, you add an animal to the mix. And so, part of what we do is really to try to not force people to think there's only one way to deal with this. You obviously want to provide them with a gold standard plan.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's not going to work, then you try to tailor something else that's going to work. And I think, that kind of that's part of the challenge of what we do too, is working within the owner's means, because obviously the animals don't show up with their own credit cards in the pocket.
Yeah.
By the way, if the world gets to that, I think we're in trouble, but
we probably are.
Yeah. Jeff's world is the breadth and span of it is fascinating to me, where for years he could walk into an examination room and be meeting with a farmer who has a dog that has a hurt foot. And well, that dog is now useless to the farmer, right? Mm-hmm. And then he can leave that room, go into the next examination room, and there's maybe somebody there with a 16-year-old cat with cancer, and they're willing to spend $10,000 on that cat, So it's just such a pendulum, just such a big swing. It's not at all like human medicine in that way.
Yeah. It is kind of fascinating to me. It's not nearly what we're going to talk about, but it does strike me that that's such an odd. And you just encompassed it perfectly. What I was thinking,
there are also some regional differences too. You go to the big cities, and some of the cost of the care is just it's spiking.
Yeah.
We live in a fairly small southeastern town and city, but fairly reasonably priced here. But you get into the major urban centers, and it can get very costly very quick.
I have considered sometimes, I've seen my veterinarian leave the room for a second, and I think, where's she going? Oh, you know what? She's calling.
Read a book.
She's calling Chevrolet to let them know she can make all 3 of her back payments. Like my dog just came in, Don't come for the car. I worked it out. Oh. Scott's dog has an ear infection. So.
Yeah, I have to say, when I'm at a bar with Jeff and someone walks up and says, "Oh, you took care of my animal," I'm like, "Oh God."
Which way's this going to go? And now I'm divorced because we're broke. Thanks so much. No, anyway. All right. Good. So Tess is 3rd grade now. She's had diabetes for, is it 5 full years?
5 full years.
In January, it'll be 5.
January, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So listen, this is a unique scenario because Jeff and Kristin have technology on their end. Like, this episode is going to screw me up, guys, because everyone's always like, "I want to come on with somebody else," and I'm like, "No, I don't have the technology for that. I'm sorry, but you have technology on your side that made it doable, but most people don't." So anyway, please don't send me a bunch of emails that say now that you can have, if you can set it up on your side, let me know. But what did you guys, when you first reached out, what were you thinking? Like, this is what I want to talk about on the podcast.
You want to go first?
I guess I don't hear enough from the both perspectives. I feel like, what I've heard on the podcast is one person's take. And I guess in real time, with someone here to fact check me and inspire me to truth and goodness, I feel like there's something about the impact of this illness on couples specifically. That was kind of where my angle was, and not necessarily looking at it as a therapy session, but just kind of wanting to get a message out that this is hard on couples, and we always try to paint a unified front out in public, and things are going great, because you don't want to go into all the the things that sucked about the morning, or
right.
The hard times you're going through. You just kind of put a happy face and just keep going, and take care of the kid. And so I feel like we're good at that, but it's just something that we're doing that I guess I wasn't hearing that perspective. And I'm a pretty avid listener of your podcast.
Thank you.
I get to drive myself to work and listen to podcasts. Kristin has the kid in the car all the time. So
I do. I'm the primary, caregiver for Tess's care. And we can kind of get into that, because I think how things are delegated between couples is really interesting.
Yeah.
And I also think, the backdrop that you just sort of heard us summarize, that we were both very career-minded for quite some time in Tess's early years. And then when she was diagnosed, in a lot of people's view, we kind of downgraded, like I switched jobs. I fell into a very fortunate situation where I actually work at Tess's school, which is elegant in so many ways. Mm-hmm. But Jeff, meanwhile, has sort of transitioned out of the emergency care work and into a day practice. And that's because we needed changes to our hours.
Yeah.
But then that also changed, what we were bringing home. And some of the money is like, already a stressor in any relationship. So to have it feel somewhat compounded by something that was out of our control, I think that's a unique area in this. And then don't even get me started on insurance companies and how we have to spend time on the phone with them. And Jeff really takes on the insurance and the medical distribution and the pharmaceutical side, whereas I'm doing more pod changes and more morning care. And then I'm at school. And so I'm the one popping in and giving her insulin to cover lunch, et cetera. So it's just a strange world, tapestry that we've woven,
No, I've said before that soon after Arden was diagnosed, we went in Arden was diagnosed when we were away on vacation. So we had to come back home and then go to, an appointment with the endo that was near our house. And after it's funny, I almost said episode, after the appointment, isn't that crazy? Like
episode 1 of the Juicebox.
I'm like, so after the appointment, the doctor asked for our kids to leave the room. She kept my wife and I behind. I've said it before, but it fits really well in this episode. And she says, look, you guys have to go to couples counseling. And I thought in my head, I was like, can she hear in our house? Like, how does she know that, And she's like, because, the instance of divorce is like 1 in 2 in America. It immediately goes to 1 in 3 if you have a chronically ill child. Or 2 in 3 if you have a chronically ill child. And I was like, my odds just got worse to stay married? I was like, I was already like, being married's not easy. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't care.
Being a parent, excuse me, being a parent's not easy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyone who thinks being married is easy hasn't been married long enough to know what they're talking about. Or your spouse is woefully lying to you on some other end. Like, you're saying things and they're just like annoyed by you and never let you know.
It does. I think it just takes an incredible amount of self-reflection and forgiveness between partners. I mean, on a daily, sometimes hourly basis, Oh, and I mean, sure. So, I mean, like, I'm not here to give relationship advice, right? Like, that's not what this is about. And Scott, please don't start into that world. Okay. But I would say that, the trick is just not to blame each other. That took time for us to learn, I feel like. And I'm certainly still learning this. And then the other tricks I would offer are, get angry at the disease, but not at each other. It's so tempting to just want to like lash out when you're really having a thin day, a day where you're just struggling so much,
Sure.
And then maybe one last trick would be to try to give each other breaks. But that is so hard. We have struggled a lot with just finding babysitters and people who can just, drop in and take care of her while we run off and, just go
get dinner.
Yeah, anything.
No, for certain. So it's interesting. You said we shouldn't give relationship advice, and you gave some really good advice about relationships. But what I was going to tell you is that nothing on this podcast is advice, so it doesn't matter. We're all good. We're covered by the disclaimer at the beginning. You can say whatever you want. I'll tell you the one thing that always kind of hits me when I'm talking about a relationship or being married. And this might be very specific to me. I have no idea. But what I find is my desire to do a good job for my wife hits me back as guilt. And so if she has a bad day, I feel badly that she had a bad day. And I feel like I wish I could have done something to make it better. Or, or sometimes then I'll speak about, I don't know, like you mentioned talking to like insurance companies, stuff like that on the phone. There are days she'll come home, she'll be like, how was your day? And I'll think, I was on the phone for like 90 minutes trying to work something out with like insulin,
Uh-huh.
And that's a good day, 90 minutes.
Yeah, right. And you're exhausted from it. And the minute she feels like I had a bad day, I see her go, well, today I did this. And it's almost like she wants to make sure that I know, don't worry, while you were working hard, I was working hard too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's this very like, I don't know if anyone's ever had that thought before, but I've told people in the past, I've been a stay-at-home dad for coming up on 20 years. I don't think the television has been on while the sun has been up in my house, maybe 5 times in that entire time. And
that's great.
That is great.
Part of that is because of my incredible anxiety that I want to be working as hard as my wife is working.
Oh, wow.
And then when I feel like I'm not, it makes me feel badly. But then whatever I say when I'm feeling guilty is never good for our relationship. I don't know if that makes sense or not. Because I always start trying to justify my life. Like, don't worry, I was working, I did this. Like, and don't get me wrong, my wife's not like walking up to me going, tell me what you did today. Like, make sure, like a time card. You know what I mean? Like, I don't, it's just this feeling I have that I want to be matching her effort.
It takes so long, though, to even get to that level of communication where you're truly not hanging things on each other. You know, like in the mornings, just as an example, we're in a rush to get off to school, Tess and I, and Jeff will ask, well, I'm going to let the dogs out, and we have to let the dogs out. And then he'll say, should I leave them out or do I go and get them? It's just a really small, minute little task in the morning, right? Yep. A little chore. And we immediately go into, no, I can't do it. Yes, I can do it. No, I can't do it, because I might have had a pod change that morning and that might have taken an extra 25 or 30 minutes. Yep. And, you know,
Friendly tip, if there's an Omnipod change due that morning, I should just go get the dog.
Yeah, or just, you know, you pick up the slack on those days when you have more of a challenge, I guess. It's a kind of an obvious statement, but I do think that in a podcast, having it explicitly said is important.
Well, I also think that what's obvious when you're intellectualizing about things is not what's obvious when you're in the moment. And I will bring to light a video that my wife showed me online the other day that's, you know, somebody pretended to be like Mike Myers or something like that. And this woman comes into her house with her 3 kids and he jumps out at them and, you know, scares the holy hell out of everybody. But then didn't stop. Like the person in the mask holding the knife, trying to scare these people, persisted. It wasn't like boo and then showed themselves. He went after them. The woman abandoned her 3 children and ran away.
Right.
And so okay, so
the oxygen mask a little too far.
Yeah, well, so she's like, "Oh, I can make more kids. I gotta go." You know, so but you know what? If we sat around and talked about it, if an intruder came into our house, what I would do is I'd collect up my children and I would. Yeah, what she did was she went, "I don't want to die," and she took off.
Wow.
And so I think it is. I think that it is worth saying those things out loud because in the moment it's hard to remember that stuff.
I mean, you just hit the nail on the head with just even talking about that video, because one of the things, I have my studious little notes right here, is talking about confrontation versus distancing. You know, it is the fight or flight response that when you're under stress, which I don't know a lot of T1D parents who aren't under just sort of a persistent, low-lying kind of, I have this, I'm plugged into this, and I'm looking at this constantly. You know, that's where I feel like that confrontation or that distancing is how you're going to cope, And lucky for Jeff and I feel like we do lean in. We decide to confront rather than distance ourselves. And maybe there's a different way to say that, maybe with not such the negative feeling of what a confrontation can be. Maybe it's a form of problem solving. But when you are in the moment, you've got like 3 things happening, and then her blood sugar decides to drop, you know, it does begin to have a kind of, I don't know, we just have better outcomes when we can just get really clear. It might be, I've thought about this, that Jeff's emergency background has really helped us quite a bit in navigating her care, because he can just be so clear and so concise, because that's how an emergency room setting is. You know, and it's so that's helped us, but then it could take away some of the glow, you know, some of the warm feelings in the home when we're just, you know, treating everything so directly. Well, so we've learned a few things.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing Kelly taught me was, and it kind of ties into what you just said. There's so much happening all the time, and you sort of have this like low level awareness of the blood sugar. I'm better at it now. Quite honestly, I am, and a lot of this podcast comes from my desire to not want to think about it constantly. Seeing how psychologically improper that is to understand what's happening constantly with someone's blood sugar. So if I can trust that what I know is going to happen, then I can stop wondering about if it's going to happen. But when it used to be in my mind constantly, sort of just in the back of my head, but other things were happening, I used to need a clean break from reality to go think about diabetes. And I used to just say shit when something went wrong, but I would say it out loud. Like, you know, you'd be moving along, trying to do dinner, beep, beep, and then I'd stop myself and turn and go do the diabetes thing. What I didn't realize was my wife found that really negative. And so she said to me, she's like, I can't, when you do that, it makes me upset. And I'm like, oh, I'm just trying to break my reality and then go do this thing and then go back to it again. She's like, yeah, from our side, it's not doing what you think it's doing. It might be doing it for you, but it's not doing that for us. And so it took me months to stop myself from just, I had built up a tiny little habit around it. And I realized that to them, it looked dramatic and like I was upset or worried or it was bothering me. And it never felt like that to me. I was just stopping myself. And I know that's weird, but that was my personal thing. And then luckily she said something to me or I'd probably still be doing it.
Is that an effort to just keep everything, that you never get away from it? So you just always keep it there? Or are you able to get away from it a little bit? And then you're saying that's what you're objecting to is, oh crap, I got to go do this thing now. And
no, it wasn't an objection for me. It was like a separation. So like, I am one of those people that if I'm in a room and I'm cooking dinner and you and Kristin are off in the corner having a conversation that's kind of meant for everybody and the television's on, I know what you two are saying to each other. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm thinking, and I know what's happening on the television. And that's just been how my brain's worked my whole life.
Omni-aware.
So what I need like a bubble of silence around me so that I can stop and think about the diabetes, because back then it wasn't the same as it is now for me. Now I'm telling you, I just look at the graph and I go, okay, here's what I need to do. And it comes to me very quickly. But back then I needed silence to kind of just wrap my mind around everything that was happening with the diabetes so that I could try to make a good decision. So that curse was what broke the noise for me and created a space.
And we share that in a way too. Sometimes we'll do a handoff and say, you know what, I'm going to take a break tonight. You watch the numbers tonight. But most often we're both aware all the time. And, whether I've been there all day or they're just getting home, it's usually like, okay, it's time for me to step in, take a quick look at the graph, listen to what she wants to eat, and then kind of pick it up from there. So,
yeah.
We have different approaches a little bit. So it's not even just the care. It's kind of like it changes based on whether it's something you're processing, I'm processing, whether we go through it. Often when we're together, we'll make a decision together. And I'm sure Tess is tired of hearing us argue about whether we're going to do the 35% extend or a 45% extend.
Right.
Yeah.
Prior to the technology, when we handed off, it was arduous because you'd be like, okay, listen, at 3:00 she ate this, at 2:00 we injected the Lantus or the Levemir went in at 8 a.m.
Right.
Like you gave this, it was like a nurse leaving her shift.
Yeah.
And now because of the technology, because the pump knows this is the last time I bolused this, how much it was. And you can see on the graph what's going on. There's sometimes something to say like, hey, she's been, I feel like there's been some insulin resistance today, or you know what, she hasn't needed as much today as she does normally, or, make sure you pre-bolus because my wife is not the greatest pre-boluser, right? So sometimes I'll say that, but I even had to learn how to say, don't forget to pre-bolus without saying, hey, Kelly, you suck at pre-bolusing.
Exactly.
So, right. And even though I never used those words, my tone was, you're going to forget the pre-bolus and mess this whole thing up. So please remember that. But now I found a better way to do it. And it's funny because the way my wife got me to be better at it was she would say, pretend I'm on that podcast and talk to me like that. And I was like, oh, because I am different here than I am at home. I get reviews or people like, I love how direct you are on the podcast. And I laugh because you have no idea how direct I am. This is me at
with kid gloves.
Oh my God, this is like me at 20%, and yeah. I'm jokey. So I can joke right into something serious. Sometimes I stop and I'm like, okay, I meant the first part. The second part was a joke. The third part is the pre-bolus. I'm very sorry I blended all that together. And so I am this podcast, you hear me say all the time, how great it's been for me because I get to go over the diabetes stuff over and over again, but it's also good for me for communication, for me staying kind of centered and calm. when people come on who are from further south, like you guys are North Carolina, that's not a real southern place anymore. I'm sorry, because of all the people who have been moving in, you have a nice blend. I didn't mean it wasn't a southern place. Please don't stop listening if you're in North Carolina. But it's got so many people from so many different places that to you, I don't speak that fast. But when we get a little more south, I actually have to try to slow myself down while I'm talking. And
well, I'll take that as a compliment.
No, please. And not that people who speak slower are, shouldn't be complimented. I actually find the way they speak really lovely. I just can't make myself do it. Yeah. And when they start speaking slower, there's a small mind, like a little voice in the back of my head that is yelling in my ear, why won't they go faster? And I'm trying to be, and I'm yelling back at the little voice in my head, no, stop it. This is good. Slow down. Anyway, there's a whole podcast going on in my head while we're doing this. But my wife helps me constantly. Listen, I'm 48 years old. Had I not met my wife, I don't know what kind of a mess I'd be right now. Like, honestly, I'd still be 22 in my mind, I think. I say all the time, my wife is killing me with her demands. But of the things that we should be doing and should be accomplishing and what the kids need and what life should be, all of that stuff, like there's a little boy inside of me who's like, why won't she shut up and just let us have fun, right? But the mature father and adult in me that really does want to grow knows that without her, I don't grow.
Well, I find your situation interesting because when I give a cursory look at research and things, different articles, medical journals, they say that most of the caregiving is done by the mother, right?
Yeah.
That's primarily what's happening in the household. And then I've also read that somewhere between a quarter to half of all T1D mothers are experiencing some form of anxiety or depression or something called morbidity syndrome, or there's PTSD. And, it's so true. You're just already under some duress and pressure for all the tasks that you perform for T1D. But then in addition to that is just being the regular parent and just being the regular wife. And, and so I think there are just classic responses to how we deal with stress and how we deal with vulnerability. And those are going to assert, they're going to come up in your relationship somehow. And I don't have all the answers, but I definitely think that just being able to say that depression can be present in the T1D home is something we have to grab onto, just grab by both horns and say, don't be afraid to admit that you're dealing with that kind of stuff, because it can really help your relationship to go and get help and get support. Yeah. So, yeah. Well,
you outlined something that's amazing. So the rest of my story about that first doctor's appointment when she says, it's 2 in 3 who get divorced, after she gave us the statistics, she looks at my wife square in the face and says, the men don't handle it well when their children don't turn out the way they expect. Whoa. And I actually was like, yo, I'm standing right here. Like, could she have not written that on a piece of paper and slipped it to her or something like that?
They also don't like being talked about.
Well, yeah. And I was like, wow. And then, but my wife laughed and she goes, oh, you have our situation all wrong. She goes, I'll leave way before he will. And it broke a laugh. And my wife said, no, seriously. She's like, Scott's a caregiver. Like there's a reason. She laughed. She goes, he's not staying home because he couldn't get a job. We made this decision consciously. And so that goes to my background. And, I've mentioned here before on the podcast that, I think that some of the reason why I can talk about this diabetes, which is at a high level, but in a very kind of real way, is because I'm an adopted person. I am a fairly bright person who was adopted by some very nice middle-class people. And so I'm this very strange blend of uneducated, but my brain has the capacity. But at the same time, I know how to talk to people. I know how people like to be spoken to and how regular people interact with each other. And so that I think helps the podcast. But then I think the next thing that helps is the stay-at-home dad aspect of it, because and I'll go out on a limb here because I don't want to jinx myself, but I have 2 very normal, mellow, reasonable, nice kids. And there have been times while I've been raising them where I've seen, wow, in this scenario, that thing you just talked about a little while ago, Kristin, that whatever that wire is that goes right from your uterus and your ovaries to your brain that makes women like look at their kids and fear for their entire life every time they look at them,
Right.
I don't have that. So when something like that happens, I'm just like, get up. It's okay. Or, the other, 6-7 months ago when we started, we went to the Loop and I put it on Arden. She goes, "Is this going to kill me?" And I went, "Probably not." And then we both laughed and walked away from each other. So that's something that's a comfort she has from my parenting style. And I genuinely meant it when I said, "Probably not." I thought, no, it probably won't. And I never thought about it again. And so my wife would stand there and stare at it forever thinking this is my mortal job on this planet to make sure that kid is not just fine, but 100% happy and gets as far as they can in life. And whatever that anxiety is that you poor women have after you make a baby, because I didn't notice it before I got her pregnant, to be perfectly honest with you. So whatever that is, I don't have it. And so it allows me to be a little looser and a little calmer in those scenarios, I think. And I didn't mean calm in a reductive way. I just mean that I'm not being poked in the brain with something that's yelling, oh my God, go save that kid."
Yeah, my parenting style would actually mirror that of yours a bit better. I would say that actually after you've seen a low or after you've been through some of the initial trauma of diagnosis, you just toughen up, and so now I'm the parent, like it's certainly around my friends and in other circles where they're just like, "You let her do what?" So I think T1D does have the ability to make you a tougher individual. And I think other people actually look at me sometimes and I don't know what they think, but I know that when we're out with friends and Jeff and I are speaking in code, okay, 30% basal increase and 0.4 and, yelling at each other from other rooms or something just to take care of the T1D stuff. I just wonder what they must look at us. Sometimes they're just aghast at like what we have to deal with. But then, and other times those friends of mine probably think that I can just handle anything. And I'm just here to say I can't. Right. I can't handle everything, And so my truest friends understand that and know that, and they're willing to learn enough to do an overnight with Tess, or to have that level of communication in place.
I always think of it as perspective, like you don't have real perspective until somebody has said to you, "Hey, inject this into your kid. If you give them too much, they might die." But if you don't give it to them, they're going to die. And you go, "Oh, okay," and then your perspective is adjusted. And it keeps happening every day. Like you said, I say stuff on this podcast all the time that I don't know how it strikes people the first time they hear it. The one thing that I'm sad about the podcast is that I can't force you to listen to it in order. Because it grows as I grow. The ideas grow as I grow. And if you're really to hear those ideas in order, it's helpful, because you don't want to jump in episode 150 when the first time you hear me say like, "Oh, sometimes you got to look at a 57 blood sugar and have the balls to just stare at it for a couple of minutes." Right. But you do, except out of context, that may not be great advice. But in context and in the timeline, you would understand it. But I think that perspective, I've seen it build in me over years. And it really is a shame. It really is a shame that we die when we get older, because we really are just starting to get good at it. You know what I mean? It's very true. But you said something a minute ago that it's funny. I used to feel that I don't feel anymore, and it made me wonder if one day you won't too. You said something about what Jeff and I have to go through. And I don't think of diabetes as something I go through anymore, but I used to.
I wonder how much of that is age related, because I feel like, she's getting older. We're getting closer and closer to narrowing the communication to where she's going to take over a lot of that. But as we are right now, she's not really doing anything on that level for herself. It's still all us. And so I wonder, just, as she gets to be a year, 2 years older, do we start to round that corner a little bit and at least give ourselves an inhale and hand that off.
Yeah, no. I think that's a great insight, is that as they get older, they take on a little more of it. But what I think you'll learn is there really isn't more of it to take on. It's just that you worry about it less. Because day after day after day after day, nothing goes really wrong. And so, when I tell people it gets easy, I don't mean, nuts and bolts gets easy. Like diabetes is always diabetes, but decisions need to be made and all of a sudden you just know what the answer is. That's like a great situation. Like, oh, this happened. I bolused for dinner and they didn't eat this. Or lately Arden hasn't been eating. There's like a bread product in with her lunch. And very much lately, she's like, oh, by the way, I didn't eat this. And I'm like, oh, that's where most of the carbs was, and I just go, okay, do this and this and that. And then it'll be fine. Like, I know how to take the insulin away to make that not a problem.
Clean up after that.
But prior, years before, I would have been like, well, drink a juice. And I guess go to the, go stand next to a cop and find an ambulance and like I just wait for death, I guess. And then, and now I'm just like, that's fine. We'll just dial this back and dial that back. And maybe in about an hour and a half, you might need to hit a half a juice box, but we won't know till then. Let's wait and see what this does.
Wow.
Yeah. When I first started listening to the podcast and I was hearing you, describe Arden's A1C as in the 5s, and we just got into the 6s and we're just in our 5th year, so it's like every arc, everyone's situation is a little bit different. And you're not going to believe this, but Jeff just looked at his phone and she's 79 with an arrow down. So we might have to pause for a second and talk to our teacher.
Well, here's the thing. You can pause if you want to.
Okay.
But I'd love you to stay on the microphone while you're doing it because
all right, let's do it.
Good. So what are you going to do first? Like, so you're going to send a text to a teacher?
Yes. I mean, they're eating lunch not for another hour. So she definitely needs either gummies or I think she has like a granola bar or something like that in her.
And is the plan to hit her with enough carbs to catch this without making her high? Or will you, trim basil too? Or how will you handle it?
Tess is drifting down a bit is his text to her. I mean, just even a juice box. There's one in her cubby.
Your Tess is drifting down a bit. You're so nice. I would be like, yo, stop everything. My kid's trying to die in the middle of English. Okay. So hold on a second. Exactly. And now do you test in this scenario?
Well,
usually Kristin's at school. So this is where she would be handling this.
Way to go, Kristin.
Yeah, we'll talk about relationships. We're actually in our house by ourselves. There's that.
we're in a school where there's no school nurse, so it's the teachers or Kristin, and so really, Kristin actually got her job through this condition because she was hanging out a lot when Tess was in pre-K.
I mean, I was commuting sometimes 45 minutes to another town outside of Asheville, and when she was diagnosed, I was like, well, that's the end of that, and. So I doubled down on being with her, and Jeff pays the mortgage with his job. And I was hanging out in the hallways. I've heard so many of your podcasts where like moms are like peeking
standing
over
outside.
Yeah, like garden walls and things and being like, I have to give my kid insulin, But so I was that person for a time while the teachers were getting kind of up on their feet about it. And so then the director came out and said, hey, what's your background? And I was like, well, funny, you should ask.
I'm whatever you need that I don't need to drive back and forth to this.
Exactly.
Jeff, by the way, I don't know if you caught it a moment ago, but you're going to have sex after this. Did you know that? Kristin just realized you guys are home alone. And
those things just go right past him.
Don't lie to us right now, Kristin. That's what you were thinking, right?
No, so it was just that we're never home alone.
Dude, you only have to try a little bit, man, and you're going to get laid after this. I'm just telling you.
Oh my gosh, you can't put that on the podcast.
I don't know. I think I can. Although, the other day I saw online the most just wonderful thing. A mom put up this little note that said that she was driving in a car talking to the person in the front seat, and her 6-year-old shushed them, holding a phone, like a cell phone with the little speaker at the bottom, jammed into her ear, and she said, be quiet, I'm listening to the Juicebox podcast.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, my demographic is all over the place.
Get that kid some earbuds.
Yeah, so I don't know. Does a 6-year-old know what that means? Maybe I'll bleep it out. But anyway, Jeff, I'm saying you really should put some effort into this when this is over, is what I'm getting at. But not in the basement, wherever you are, right? Although, unless that's what you're up to. I don't,
So the teacher has responded, and she's giving the juice. I got the big old thumbs up.
Okay, yeah.
So So what did you tell them to do? Is it going to be juice?
This is a situation where we really don't want her going low. Kristin's not on hand. Her teacher doesn't usually, she's not usually running the show as far as the PDM goes and all that. So we don't really have that as an option to slow down the insulin. So in this case, because we're here and we're trying to keep communications pretty succinct, we just went for the juice box.
Juice box. I think that's smart. I think the juice box, if it's 15 carbs, at her, what does she weigh? Like 45, 50 pounds?
No, she's over 50 now.
50 pounds. Yeah. It'll probably, I bet you that cuts the arrow out. I bet you it hits around 70, hangs, and drifts back up. Does that sound like what you expect?
That sounds about right.
That sounds right. It's been a real slow drift down that we've been watching. Actually, didn't even watch it for a while, but I felt like I should do the right thing and take a look at the number. And they're not eating lunch for another hour is the other thing there.
It's perfect. So, and you know what the great thing about this is for people listening, that even if this juice box ends up being too much, Jeff can pre-bolus a little earlier to cut some of the number out before the food. So there's a way here to balance being more aggressive with the juice right now for safety and for comfort because we're recording, and at the same time not let it get out of hand or cause another low before the meal.
Sure.
Right.
Something that we're going to have to chase double arrows up or anything.
Right,
I don't feel like it's going to be that.
Yeah, we're in that classic pattern. I don't know. It feels like classic to us anyway because it's so routine that her biggest numbers are right over breakfast. And, we are just so bored with breakfast. So listeners out there, if you have any ideas on like what kind, because, obviously the better the protein in the breakfast, the better the morning in terms of blood sugars. Mm-hmm. But we're sick of eggs, sick of bacon, sick of, turkey and everything else.
No kidding. No, well, how are you with the other stuff? Like, can you...
So she'll have pretty decent afternoons is what we find.
I don't know. I think you're asking, do we restrict anything? Is that...
I'm saying like if I gave her 3 pancakes, can you handle that? Or are you not up to that yet?
We have to think about that, obviously, and get ahead of it. But yeah, we've done that. And usually that's on the weekends when we're, have the time for it, a little bit of powwow back and forth. And usually we can flatten that line pretty well. Yeah.
I'll tell you too, like when you were speaking earlier about what happens when she gets older, what happens when she gets older is you can miss on a breakfast and she's on her way to school and then send her a text and be like, hey, bolus more. Yeah. And it's not this whole thing where it goes through the teacher. Because I wonder... Because I felt like I heard it in your voice a second ago, Jeff, because I have this feeling too. You don't want to involve the teacher unless you have to, because you don't want that light shined on her, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's
well, we already know that there's her alarm is set at 90 at school, which, maybe we should go a little lower, but they're probably already hearing that and just wondering, what do we do? We've basically ingrained it that, it's the lows that we're worried about.
Right. Do they wait for you on, is there ever a time that they pop up and do something on their own, or is it always in conjunction with you?
If Tess feels low, and she feels her lows more and more, and she actually is taken to guessing her number. Like she woke up the other day and she was like, I feel like I'm 93 and even, but maybe a soft arrow down. And I was like, wow. and she was right on. She nailed it.
I'm a fan of that. I used to do that with Arden too, like to try to teach her how she felt. And,
right.
You know what I mean? Because if you do it enough times, and it's tough too, because then the other side of it is I always tell her the way you feel is not important. It's the number. Sure. It's the number, the direction, or the speed, because you can feel great and not have a great blood sugar. We had she went to a homecoming football game the other night, and no lie, the whole day is going great. Blood sugars are fantastic. And I'm telling my wife, I'm like, Kels is going to be wonderful. We can drop her off at this football game and we can go to dinner or something, and it's going to be fantastic. And took her to the game, dropped her off, and the CGM just, it was done. It died. And it was right up on the end. And I thought, it'll make it till she gets home, and then it didn't. So now she's there, no CGM. So I said to her, I'm like, you need to test because now the CGM's not working. So now the loop's not working. The loop's open. I'm like, I think you're going to go up based on what happened before. And she said, no, I'm fine. And I was like, no, I bet you're not. And so she tested and she goes, oh, you know what? I'm 220. And I was like, oh yeah, see, because now all of a sudden, all of our tech's going out of nowhere. So we bolused really aggressively. And I was like, so we're going to test again, probably in 45 minutes.
Right.
And then we texted back and forth. We got her home, put on a new CGM, and she went to bed around midnight and everything was fine. But it was that expectation. Like, I have this, it's so easy. I know what to do, and this is how we'll handle it. And then it all
Take away that
fell
technology,
apart for a
and
couple hours.
we're back in the Wild West.
Yeah.
You made me just think, how on earth do people do this solo parenting? I mean, and I'm not saying that like I have some kind of, I have complete empathy, like just such deep concern and empathy for, we're a duo, and when she is at home on the weekends, or we have a vacation, or her outcomes are much better when we're together and we're both troubleshooting. And so while I get a sense for what that must be like, because I am the primary caregiver throughout most of the day, it still just must be very difficult for a single parent trying to manage this, or a parent who maybe there's a custody share or something like that, where you have to kind of transition, like you were saying, those nurse notes, like you got to kind of end your shift with the kid and then hand them over to that other person. I can't imagine. I think that would be a really interesting perspective to get a hold of.
Yeah. Well, I think that's certainly true. And I also certainly think that it's true that there are plenty of married people who, when it comes to diabetes and sort of other things in their life, are single parents to begin with as well, because people see things as their job or your job,
Right.
which I don't buy into. And interestingly enough, Kristin, you might not have a ton of appreciation for it looking at your life from the inside out, but Jeff's a vet, so he's probably a fairly compassionate person.
You would think.
Right? Seriously, right? So, like my father would just have like looked at my mom and been like, "You wanted kids." You know what I mean? Like, and that would have been it. And I think a lot of guys are like that. Like, that's not my job. I went to work already today. You take care of those kids, or vice versa. Like, in a household where even a woman's working full time and the man's at home, it'd be very easy for them to say, "Look, that's not my thing. I did my thing already today." And I think a lot of people, I think a lot of people live with that. I think there's a lot of people nodding their heads right now thinking, yeah, my guy don't really do much. Maybe Scott's endo was right when he, back then. And it sucks because there's plenty of people who aren't. There's plenty of guys right now like, yo, man, I'm, it's 2019 and it's a team effort and I'm in on it too. But I think both of those scenarios exist.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. What do you do when someone suddenly, like you talked earlier about the anxiety of, being in charge of what it feels like is keeping someone alive constantly. Like, I used to explain it when I was really in the middle of it still, and I really didn't have a handle on it. I would tell people, I feel like someone told me that I have to consciously say, breathe in, breathe out, or I'll suffocate. Like, do you know what I mean? Or like that, or that I have to remind my heart to beat every 20 seconds. Or that's how it
There
felt.
was a day when Tess was old enough to go to summer camp for the first time. She was 5, so we were still only diagnosed about a year. And that was summer camp. And it was a total turning of the tables in terms of her day. And she had 3 lows in one day, which I don't know the averages for other people, but that just felt, that day was it just stood in my mind as like, now life is changed now, and I guess that was the same summer that she had the CGM for the first time. I think that's right. And so just that awareness, that pushing back of the curtains and seeing what's going on all of the time with the technology, and that she had 3 lows. I remember distinctly just being in the car and driving and being like, I have to breathe. Like, this should be illegal. Like, I should not be allowed to drive right now while I'm this like hopped up on the fact that my kid had 3 lows today, Yeah.
Well, how much of, well, first of all, earlier you said this, I have to be somewhere by 12:30. Is that going to be enough time? Now I realize I'm going to probably end up keeping to whatever minute you have to leave. But what has your time with diabetes taught you? Because it's funny when you talk about she went to a day camp and had lows, my brain jumps to, oh, it's a shame because you didn't know how to like manage her basal insulin so that she wouldn't get low in a scenario like that. And most people don't really, right? Like they set up their basal insulin to work in most scenarios. And then you hear people say, oh, exercise is completely impossible. I can't do this or I can't do that. And it's just because they have too much insulin happening and they don't think about it like that. But do you think about it like that now? Like if that scenario popped up today with the knowledge you have today, do you think the 3 lows would have happened?
Well, she still has, we get on jags, if she drops, she goes up and then she comes back down. And I mean, I can say that I still don't have it as even Steven as I would like it. Mm-hmm. But there are some techniques, like you're saying, the basal and the, some other things that we do now that has created many more better outcomes. So it's hard for me to.
But I think what you were saying with that, if I may speak for you, I don't wish to, and tell me if I'm wrong, is just that you were talking about when she went to camp and that was a big difference from the day-to-day routine. And so, what is diabetes taken from us or from Tess? It's a little bit of she has to be with people that know enough about it that they can step in and do something. Otherwise, we're relying on the technology from a little bit of a distance and then kind of dialing it in. Hey, can you give her this juice box without ever really explaining or having her in the care of someone that totally gets it? Now, there are a few teachers that have really taken initiative to learn about it. And when she was in those classes, felt great about, we don't need to watch it every minute because they're going to take care of this. But in terms of the nuts and bolts, we still have never really had that handoff where maybe we had 24 hours, away in all of this time since she's been diagnosed, right? And otherwise, it's either Kristin or myself in charge. And there's never been a moment really where we've said, okay, hand off and someone else make these decisions. And I mean, I guess that's probably pretty typical, but it's really, I guess I feel for Tess in a way because we've sheltered her somewhat. Like we've had her in an environment where either Kristin's right there or, we're all together or, she and I are together, but never just like kind of going off grid, so to speak, Jeff, and just being able to manage it.
That'll stop. And she won't remember it that way.
Yeah.
Well, she's not going to think of it as you lording over her when she was little. She's going to think of it as my family was always together. Like it's not, she doesn't have your perspective.
Well, I see the upsides of that, but like, for example, grandparents, they are super apprehensive about one-on-one time with her without us being either right there or, available to respond right on a moment. Mm-hmm. And that's something that's taken from her. I feel like, they see the diabetes and then they see the granddaughter. We see the kid and then the diabetes is kind of second to that. But I feel like maybe just that one segment, I feel like her friends accept her as a person that has diabetes, not as a condition. Oh. But I feel like, there's some people that could otherwise step in and have a role to play that I feel like this condition is kind of loomed a little bit large and it's difficult to get the right information to them.
And we're still tender. I mean, we're 5 years into it. So it's kind of the spot where we're still tender about what we're learning and how we're dealing with it. And we're hardening up to the future of her managing so much more of it. And it not being so much of a thing. I mean, I can tell where my stress level has gone down over the course of the last year or so. But in terms of grandparents and in terms of extended family, which is certainly another aspect of relationship to get into, we both have parents on either side of us that also have medical conditions. So a lot of that is, I'm like what I like to call my Oreo years, where I'm like in the middle, my mom is having some issues and then I have a daughter. And so who knew that I was really going to have to perfect this thing called caregiving. But I don't know how that plays a part, but maybe you could share with us, Scott, when Arden was younger, did you have another figure in her life that could just come in and take care of things and let you and your wife go out or go and travel or what have you?
Oh, I don't think you're going to like my answer. My answer is it's no, of course not. And at the same time, I didn't see that as a particularly bad thing. So I have a little bit of perspective on this that maybe other people don't. So
well, it certainly is a luxurious position of mine, to want to go off. Yeah.
No. And I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to go out. And I'm not saying that. I'm saying that, first of all, I'm a I'm a no person. Like I work backwards from no. So any question that's brought to me starts at no. Like, can we buy a sofa? No, of course not. We can't afford that. How would we buy a sofa? And then maybe like 10 steps into it, I'll think, we probably could. But I don't trust people either in scenarios like this. I trust people fine in other ways, but I'm also the kind of person who's like, school nurse. Well, if they were really a good nurse, would they be a nurse at school? Like, I don't know that that's even true. It's just where my no, like, and I'm not disparaging school nurses. What I'm saying is that I always start at what's wrong. And so I decided at some point, like, we're going to be the ones to take care of this. And one day it won't be like that. But the other thing that I have going for me is that I had a moment in my life when Kelly had started working and I had started staying home with Cole. And he was maybe like a year and a half old or something. And I was doing great. Like, I really felt like I was. Like, he was safe and fed and, learning to crawl and walk. And I was feeding him and going grocery shopping and kept the house clean. But it was all very much like I was just doing the things that I felt like I was supposed to be doing. And I realized one day, like, this is not what my wife would be doing, that she would just sort of know organically what this kid needed and what would make his life better. And I felt like she was more in tune because she was his mom, and that I had to find a way to be more in tune with it. And more importantly, that I needed to find a way to take joy out of taking care of him. Like, I couldn't look at him as a job or a burden or something that I was like forced into doing. I had to want to do it every day. And that when I wanted to do it, when I let go of the other things that I thought I was supposed to be doing with my life, I realized these things are just as wonderful and fulfilling as something else that I thought I was going to do. I really wanted to write a book. And then I realized I'm not going to do that. I'm taking care of him. I'm raising Cole. And it's funny, I wrote a book one day. You know what I mean? And
one day?
It took 6 months, but one day I got to write a book. And it was 13 years after I let go of the idea that I really did want to write a book one day. And so, but in now sitting here 20 years later, as my son's 20, my life is completely wonderful. And I enjoyed all of that stuff that prior to having that thought, I saw as work and a job and stuff I didn't really want to be doing. So I wonder if the goal isn't to just stop seeing the diabetes as a job and just start seeing it as something that exists in your life that you can find joy in. And then you get to let that go. And then instead of fighting against it, it propels you instead of drags you down. And my other thought about the grandparents thing was this: what if you pull them aside and unburden them? Just tell them, look, this thing is way more complex than you may be able to imagine. And I feel like you're worried about Tess, and we appreciate that. But the truth is, no matter how much you worry about it, you're not going to be able to figure this out. So just let it go. We'll take care of it. You don't worry about it. Like, give them the permission not to act like parents around her when it comes to diabetes. I wonder if that would work.
I think we have in so many words, but just being that clear could be very useful. Interesting.
Listen,
that was great advice.
No, but nothing you hear on the Juicebox podcast is advice. Stop it. What are you doing? You're trying to get us kicked off the internet? Listen, I told my mom yesterday, my mom's in her mid-70s, and she likes to go to the gym, but she doesn't drive, so she takes sort of like a service that drives her back and forth. And she told me she really wants to go to the gym 3 times a week, but she can only afford to go twice. And I said, can you really only afford to go twice? And she's like, well, no, I'm saving for Christmas and birthdays. And I said, Mom, listen to me. You want to give my kids a great Christmas present? Come to the house on Christmas and tell them what great health you're in because you're going to the gym 3 times a week. Yeah. And explain to them that you're really sorry, but you have a card and a hug and a kiss and a well wish for them, but not a $100 gift card, which, by the way, they don't need anyway. And you use that money to go to the gym on Friday. And my mom tried to fight back. Well, I liked it. I was like, I don't care. Stop it. I was like, take care of yourself first. And don't worry about us. We're okay. And I realized that that's information I'm probably telling myself for the future as much as I'm telling her for now, because I know how I think about my kids. And I wonder how much I'm going to be able to let go of that idea that they don't need me when they get older. So I don't know. I just think there's a cycle in there. Like you can't break a parent from being a parent, but maybe you could at least give them the permission to let it go for an hour. Sure. And tell them, look, I don't want you to see Tess as diabetes, and that's happening. Because I used to do it with Arden. Arden used to walk in the door from school and I'd be like, what's your blood sugar? The first thing I would say to her. And then one day I was like, I can't do that. Like, no matter how much I'm concerned or worried or care, I'm doing more harm to her by asking that than would be done to her if she dropped over in front of me and needed a juice. So,
Yeah.
you know.
So, you have, she's a nutritionist who is also a nurse on a couple of your episodes.
Jenny,
excuse me.
No.
And so the other thing I wouldn't mind talking about briefly, it is kind of getting away from the relationship stuff, is have you heard or seen anything around eating disorders? And so one thing, like you talk about, we talk about the diabetes so much, we certainly do, but I'm even more worried that at dinner time, I'm always like, well, what did you eat? Or what's missing? Or what did you have? And so we have such a focus on the food that she's 8 right now. So she's coming into those preteen years. And I just want to get ahead of it in terms of just hoping that I'm doing everything right to get her to have the right mindset about food.
Yeah. No, so I completely agree with you and I want to talk about it. But Arden's blood sugar just took a weird turn and she's sleeping.
Oh.
So I'm going to go for a second.
Okay.
And I'll be back in like 90 seconds. I'm going to give you guys a great opportunity, right? Feel this pressure. I'm going to let this record. You try to keep people entertained for 90 seconds. Go.
Okay, we're going to do that. Here we go. Grab the guitar. 90 seconds. He has no idea that we're doing this. Whoa, you just hit the microphone square on. Okay, here we go. All right, you need these. Give us a second, audience. All right.
Well, they can't play this anyway because of the copyright.
Oh. I tried so hard, my dear, to show that you're my every dream. Yet you're afraid each thing I do is just some evil scheme. A memory from your lonesome past keeps us so far apart. Why can't I free your doubtful mind and melt your cold, cold heart?
Unbelievable. You guys sang a song when I walked away?
Well, you said to do something entertaining and, you only gave us 90 seconds. So I don't know what you were alluding to, but...
No,
like
that's for later, Jeff. But no.
Like a verse of a Hank Williams song would fill that.
That was amazing. I came back in the room and I'm reaching for the headphones and I'm like, are they playing music? And then I realized you were singing. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to lose this podcast to more talented people.
Unlikely.
So I think Arden's laying on her CGM. I think that's what's happening. So I'll know better in a second.
No blood flow.
But, yeah. Well, no, you know what? It's actually the interstitial fluid gets pushed away from the wire.
Right.
So when it says her blood sugar is 60, it's right. The sugar in the interstitial fluid right around the wire is 60. And then when you stop pressing on it and stop pushing the interstitial fluid away and it flows back in, and like 2 more generations of the readings, you'll get a good reading again.
Equilibrates.
That's really cool. So, okay, that was pretty great.
Okay.
Geez, I'm going to have to raise the bar on these episodes.
Well, I'm happy to report that our Juicebox has worked.
Good for you. What's the blood sugar?
It did go down to 66, and then it came back up, and now it's 79 and even.
Nice.
4 minutes ago. So
well done.
I think we'll coast into lunch pretty well there.
That's excellent.
Yep.
Okay, so Kristin, your question about food it's very important. So the more you listen to this podcast, the more you're going to hear adults who are in their 30s, and some of them didn't have parenting the way you're describing, or maybe the way I talk about it.
Uh-huh.
And if you really hear what they're talking about, they think when they were Tess's age, when they were 15, when they were Arden's age, they wish their parents were more involved. They may have acted like they didn't want them involved sometimes when they were older, but they wanted it. And now that they're older, they recognize that they didn't understand diabetes as well as they thought they did when they were leaving for college or at a football game or something like that in high school, and that they wish someone would have stayed on them. So I think it's a classic parenting thing, right? You have to be interested. I see my job as a parent as just saying the same thing a million times without getting annoyed by it, right? Because eventually they hear it. And that's true. When you have, once Tess is 20, you'll realize you said something 1,000 times and one day it just hit her. And
we thank her for taking good care of herself. Like every time she does even the smallest thing, we say, thank you for taking such good care of yourself.
That's lovely.
I hope that that's in there somewhere.
It will, and it all will be. Here's what I know,
Right.
though. Like, I used to take my son to the zoo when we were just together by ourselves. And we would do things like just sit with our lunch and watch tigers eat. And talk to him about being polite to people and that sort of stuff. And if you ask him about it now, he doesn't really remember any of it. But yet, the impact I thought those moments would have on him seems to have worked, because he is the person, or close to, that I was hoping he could be. So I think you don't get to see it the way you expect later. They don't sit down one day and tell this great story about this time you and them did something together. Or my mom used to say to me, thanks for taking good care of myself when I was younger. They might not remember that, but I think it still works. It's not your expectation for what that'll look like when they're older as far as their memory, but it works out in their actions, I think.
It's in there as a more foundational thing, I guess, than a
Yeah, it's like a painting,
specific.
really. It's like a painting. Like, you paint the first line on the canvas and, when you're done, you don't see it, but it would look different if it wasn't there.
Right.
Well said.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. There are sometimes I say stuff and I think, like, that was just one of them. Just now I was like, oh, that was good. It was more fun that you said it out loud, because I had never said that before until just now. Like, that's why I love these podcasts. I've never once had that thought in my entire life until just this second. But anyway,
those wheels spinning.
Please, I'm going now. What I was going to say about the food is you're 100% right. You cannot create an adverse relationship between food and your kid. You do not want to get into a situation where they're like, I don't want to bolus, so I'm not going to eat. Mm-hmm. So the way I think about that is, sometimes Arden's blood sugar is higher than I wish it was when she ate. And I don't say stuff like, you can't have that because of this.
Right.
I mean, sometimes if it's really bad, I'll say, look, we have to pre-bolus here and we have to wait, but we're definitely going to eat it. And sometimes she'll go, never mind. I'll be like, no, not never mind. We're going to do it. Let's do it. But
right.
if the difference between her blood sugar being 180 when this is over or 100, if the difference is I have to make her feel bad about herself to get her to 100, I take the 180.
Take the 180.
Yeah. Right. So, and again, that's just going to be the same thing. You're just doing these things over and over and over again and hoping they come out right. I think where people go wrong is they expect something to happen immediately. Like, do you have any idea how many times people say to me, I would like Arden to come on the podcast? Because what they want to know is Arden's okay, so they can believe their kids are okay. Like, everybody wants it right away. You know what I mean? Like, the answer. When I talk to people privately, you know what they want to know when you talk about insulin? How much? How long? Tell me. Give me a number. And I'm like, there's no number. Like, you'll figure it out in 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 20 minutes. I don't know what your pre-bolus is. You're going to have to figure it out. How much to give? I don't know how much to give. Like, you figure that out. But what you see when you hear those, please have Arden on to tell. By the way, Arden doesn't want to come on the podcast. She doesn't even think about that.
That's all right.
Yeah, she doesn't even think about diabetes the way you guys think she does. She's pretty free and clear in her life. And the other thing is the insulin. When you hear people ask about that, what they really want is they want comfort. They're like, just please show me something that tells me this is going to be okay for me, and that my kid's not going to be the one who, it goes wrong for. Like, I feel like that's what they're asking me for. And I can't do that. All I can tell you is that you should do whatever you think is best and do it every day the best you can. And if you're lucky, it'll work out. I mean, there's no, I don't know, what's that song? I never promised you a rose garden, right? Like, life isn't, you.
Oh, don't be asking us for requests.
You win country music. I can dip into what I heard my parents listening to when I was little. But you know what I mean? Like, there's no guarantees that any of this is going to work out. So I think the best you can do is the best you can do. And if you really can be honest with yourself and realize maybe sometimes the best you can do, you're not doing, then if you really want to make an impact on it, don't ask another person to tell you it's going to be okay. You try to make it okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And that must have been also what your wife was saying too, when you would say, "Oh, explicative," because you just looked at the phone and it didn't report to you what you wanted. So that's the same thing, is that try to take the negative out of it. And
Yeah.
I don't ever tell Tess, this is a good number, this is a bad number. Numbers are just numbers, and we're just dealing with them. At least I try to say that, but it's just human nature to be kind of shocked by something and have to know. Yeah.
But you can make it go away. Like you really can. Some of it's just time in the simulator. You have to do it enough times. And sometimes it's somebody to help you. I never even considered that Arden would think of me as saying that, saying as being like a bad, reflection on her. I never even thought of that in that moment. But I totally see it now removed from it. Mm-hmm. And so you have to ask yourself sometimes, like, what am I doing wrong right now? Because you know what? Here's how I think of it. My youngest brother, Rob, and he's a great guy, but he was always in trouble when we were little. And I used to think that Bob had two states of being. Bob was either in trouble or Bob was either in trouble or you were about to find out Bob was in trouble. Like there was no, he was never not in trouble. You just were aware of it or you weren't aware of it, right? Like he hadn't gotten caught yet, kind of an idea. And I think that about me right now and you and everybody listening. We are screwing something up right now in our lives. Always. Like we're always doing something that's not exactly what we mean to be doing. Or isn't being received by the people who we love the way we think it is. You know what I mean? Like, did you ever look at somebody and they're doing something and you think, oh, I know why they're doing that. It's because they're tired. But the truth is, there's a whole other reason why they're acting that way that you don't know. But you make this assumption, and then once you make the assumption, you believe you're right, then you project that assumption onto everybody else, and you go along thinking, yeah, I'm doing great. But how many people do you see from afar who you're like, wow, what a mess their life is, right? How do they not see that? And the truth is because whatever you think today, Jeff, you trust. And I really believe that's around sanity. Can you imagine if you were constantly questioning every thought you had, right? There'd be inaction. You wouldn't be able to move. So we as people, as humans, we just innately believe in ourselves. But once in a while, you have to step back and say, I bet I'm not right about everything. I wonder what I'm seeing reflected in for me from the people I care about. Those are probably the things I could be working on. And just keep doing that. Otherwise, you will get on this really ignorant path to destruction, right? Like you're just
anxious. Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to drive headlong.
Growth mindset. Yeah.
I'm right. I don't have to think about any of this. Just keep going. And then one day when it all falls apart, you're going to go, I don't know what happened. You know what I mean? So for a person who's not in any way religious, which I'm not, I just realized that everything I just said sounded like religion for a second, but I think you have to just step back
spiritual.
And wonder what it is that you're not doing that you could be doing and do it. Because whether you want to believe it or not, with a young child, this time of your life, from when they're born to when they leave for college, it's a blip. And I'll tell you, get in what you want to get in now, because, once they hit 18, you don't have a lot of opportunities to make adjustments anymore. Got to get
the days are long and the years are short.
You need, oh my God. I said that to one of my daughter's kids one time and friends, and she was just like, that's so deep. And I was like, that's not really. But I just, I said how a day feels like it can take forever, but a month goes by like that. And it fried their minds. They were like, oh my God, I've noticed that. And
there's always a little truth in cliche.
Yeah, of course. Listen, you got to get the car running as right as you can before you get it out on the track, because you might not get time to pit. And so, once that kid leaves your house, there aren't going to be a lot of pit stops after that. That's all. So don't waste this time. I guess is another way to say it. Please. I talk so much. I'm likely to say something reasonable once in a while if you talk enough, right? I appreciate that a lot. So do you have to go, Kristin? Are you?
She's got a few more minutes.
I've got a couple more, but we've really covered a ton. We've covered a lot.
You guys got me going. I feel like I feel like we were doing like a talk show on remember when we were growing up, like Channel 48 or something like that. I really felt like we were doing that. And like in the middle, Glenn Campbell came on. And I was like, this is exactly like the TV my parents watched in the 70s.
great to have a peer group, I think, with this, and that's something I think that we would benefit greatly from. But, Asheville is a fairly small city. And so we haven't really reached out to the local folks. I mean, we've done JDRF events and things, but in terms of at the level that we want, where it's just an honest conversation and, you just step forward with who you are and your experience, that just doesn't really exist for us. So this is really great.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I also don't think it exists for anybody. I think that as soon as you put people in a room and they can see each other's faces, then there's a feeling like you need to represent yourself well. Like if I don't do the podcast looking at anybody because I want them to feel like they're just a detached voice talking to another detached voice so they can be honest.
Yeah.
Jenny and I see each other when we do the Pro Tips episodes, but that's just for timing. That's so that I can see that she's not finished talking and I don't talk over. Sometimes I talk over people because in my mind, I'm like, ooh, they're done. And then I like conversation to flow quickly. So I jump in and then they're not. But where we lose that, we gain a feeling of anonymity, I guess. And allows people to be more honest while they're talking. So just keep listening to the podcast. You don't need to go
for sure.
Yeah. I mean, what are you going to go to a thing? They're going to make you bring coffee, Jeff. You know what I mean?
Don't make him answer that question.
You don't need more to do, man. And so you're busy, So where do you imagine, if I can ask, can you imagine that 5 more years from now it's not going to feel like this, or are you really concerned that this feeling doesn't go away?
I believe we're on trajectory for her to take over. Part of, I think, the brilliance of the age that she's been diagnosed, if she had to be at a young age, is that she doesn't really have to do that much other than to do all these things with the site changes and put up with a lot. But she doesn't really, I think, identify with how you described Arden, that diabetes doesn't define her and she doesn't really spend that much time on a day-to-day thinking about it. So to me, I know that she's got it. I know she knows all these terms. She's doing her own PDM. She'll probably treat herself for lunch as long as she has an adult watching her. But at some point, she is going to have to step up and react to the alarms and not just wait for someone to come to her with Juicebox. And so I see her as intellectually there. But, emotionally to really step up and, is she going to respond to an alarm at night? Or is it going to be still relying on us to come in and say, hey, wake up, drink this juice and go right back to sleep?
Jeff is the optimist in our relationship. I could say something more along the lines of, okay, 5 years, she'll be smack in the middle of her teenage years. She'll be more responsible than most, but she'll also have a really big rebellion streak. And I don't know how that will manifest. I don't know if she'll be the kind of person who gets really motley and moody and doesn't want to, she wants to take it out on her diabetes, or will she want to be the one who keeps it all together? And it's a question. It's a good question. I mean, yeah.
Well, so it's so funny because here's my response to both of you. And Kristin, I'll start with you first because I'm going to t-shirt cliche you, right? Worry is a waste of imagination. You have absolutely no idea what's going to happen in the future. And you trying to imagine what is going to happen is a fairly big waste of your time.
All right.
Right? Because she may or may not be all of those things or something you can't even think of right now. Like, don't forget right now, it's just the three of you. She's going to go meet another person. She'll have a different idea. She might go down a different road. She might figure something out. You know what I mean? Like maybe she'll just come home one day and be like, whoa, I can't believe it, but I would like to take care of my diabetes now. And I know what to do, and I really appreciate you guys, but get out of this. But still help me a little bit. And Jeff, what you said is interesting because you are looking for a moment where she's just like, I understand this, let me do it. Because you're worried that one day she'll leave the house, I'm assuming, and not understand it. And I think that that's a bit of folly too, because my son and I FaceTimed. Well, we didn't FaceTime. I went to his baseball game the other day and we had dinner afterwards. And there were things he was saying that I was like, wow, like that kid's really growing and learning. And like, listen to that, like thoughtfulness from him. And there were moments where he was saying something to me and he needed me to tell him if he was right or not. And he's a bright kid taking a tough major. And I think if I drop dead right now, he'd have an okay life. But there are still moments where he looks at me and says, I need to understand if I'm thinking about this right.
Needs dad's advice, context.
But what I'm thinking is around the diabetes, I think it's sort of, I sort of think it's a false narrative, that idea that one day like a switch will get flipped and then they'll just do it on their own. I think that you are involved in something that you guys might be connected on for a really long time. And again, I think if you listen back to some of the people who have struggled as adults with diabetes, their parents had this cord cutter thought in their head. Like, oh, she's got it now, it's okay. And the truth was the kid didn't have it, and also didn't have the guts to look at the parent and say, look, I know you want to be out of this, but I don't understand yet. And so I think it's, I think that the amount of interaction that we have with our kids as they get older lessens, but I don't think the need for it lessens. If that makes any sense.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, there's a lady we have met through our local JDRF, and she just sent her son, her T1D kid, to college. And, he fell asleep at night and had a pretty shocking low, and she could still see it, 3 cities over, And so she's calling, and then she calls the dorm manager or whomever to go and knock on the door to wake him up to get him some sugar. And I was just horrified at that story, because I was just thinking maybe fantastically that, I do look to Tess to be able to take care of that. I cannot be with her all the time. I'm not her outside pancreas, I'm trying to work myself out of a job.
Well, and if that makes you feel any better to know that, I thought that story was pretty cool, that like there was someone to call and they went and helped her.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I think if you're hoping that your kid's never going to have a low blood sugar as an adult, that they don't, that they aren't aware of, I don't think that's something you should be hoping for. I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't think that everyone's always going to hear the alarms. And I think that everybody's always going to need help. And I think that aside from diabetes, people always need help. We don't admit it really, but there's no day that goes by that you don't need somebody's assistance with something. And life is always sort of better when there are other people involved anyway. Mm-hmm. So maybe it'll be your daughter's roommate, or, you know what I mean? Like maybe you'll, I don't know. But I couldn't wake Arden up with a bullhorn, to be perfectly honest with you. But seriously, I mean, I could walk in a room and begin to scream. And
have you ever tried that theory?
That seems cruel, so I haven't. No, but
I've taken Tess out of bed and set her up next to the bed and put clothes next to her, assuming that she's going to get dressed, and come back in the room and she's sleeping on the floor. Like she just slid down the side of the bed.
Listen, if you want to feel hopeful, realize this. No matter how you think we got on this planet, at one point we got here and we didn't even speak. And now we can get into a tin can and fly all around the planet. So people have a way of persisting. I don't want to quote Jurassic Park, but life finds a way. And so most of people living with something, they find a way to live with it. And then from there, whether or not that means you're burdened by it or you're enlightened by it, that ends up being a personal decision about how you see it. And very similarly to me looking at taking care of my son for that first year and a half as a job, I just decided not to see it as a job anymore. I decided to see it as something that, I started thinking of vacuuming the floor as positive because, it felt like a waste of my talent. But at the same time, I wanted my kids to appreciate a clean house because I thought one day that meant they'd keep a clean house of their own. And I visited my son at school the other day and he keeps a really clean dorm room. And maybe I had something to do with that. And maybe I didn't, but I get to think I did. So, that's
or he had 20 minutes to spare before you showed up.
Nah, he doesn't care what I think. So there's no way he would have cleaned up before I got there. So, but you know what I mean? There's just these you're planting seeds along the way and some of them will grow trees and some of them won't. But you're not in charge of which ones grow and which ones don't. You're just in charge of planting the seeds.
It's a weird condition too, because part of me has this faith in the future that the technology is going to connect and it's going to work.
Certainly.
And so there's that. Obviously we can't predict when that would be or what exact moment that's going to be. I have a feeling it's going to be gradual and we'll never really witness it or observe it, and then bam, it'll be totally different.
That's how everything happens. Everything happens like that, slow and steady. Then a new person comes in. They don't even know what a great advancement they've made. You and I don't ever think about boiling urine to find out what somebody's blood sugar is, but people lived like that for a long time. And, like Xeris Pharmaceuticals just came out with this glucagon that, it's approved for emergency use right now, but they're
nasal?
No, this one's a pre-mixed injectable. So you never know if somebody won't take that one day and find a way to put it into a closed loop system that when your blood sugar gets low, it just gives you a little bump of glucagon.
Yeah.
And then your liver goes, oh, you need some sugar? Here's some glucose. And that's it. Maybe that'll be it. Maybe it'll just be that your daughter will be able to have a 58 that's fighting with her, and she'll be able to do a little bump of like a mini glucagon bump. And just like you would inject the insulin, you inject a little bit of that. And there's so many things that are going to happen, even just with closed loop systems. They sometimes can't stop lows, but they can shut insulin down. So maybe she'll get into the 50s, and I'm sure she will while she's off at college sometime, but maybe she'll be wearing, Omnipod's Horizon, and it'll just shut her insulin off.
But not the 20s or 30s.
Right, and it'll keep her from actually having a seizure or being, it's not going to be a great morning for her when she wakes up, but she'll be alive, and, and she'll move on. Like, you don't know what this stuff's going to be. And again, I think trying to imagine it's counterproductive to you being happy today.
Gotta live in the moment.
That's it. There are a lot of t-shirt slogans in this episode for certain. And I have to be honest with you, we're very close. I'm very close to calling this episode either Robitussin or t-shirt slogans abound. I'm not sure which it's going to be yet. But I really enjoyed this, and you guys were terrific.
It's been great for us. We've been looking forward to it. I know we set it up a long time ago, and it's kind of been in the back of my mind. And we've really enjoyed the show. We've learned a ton. Interestingly, we actually have an endocrinology appointment later on today, so I feel like we're going to be having dinner tonight, like with minds blown. Like, what distance have we traveled today together, and where are we? And it'll feel like a journey, I think.
What's your expectation for A1C today when you get there?
I'm going to hope for 7.
6.9.
6.9-ish.
Yeah. Well, that was the last one, so 3 months ago. So I'm going to say that I don't entirely trust the readings that for the A1C. I think we're coming a little bit lower than what the clarity tells us. So I'm thinking 6.7 would be great, but obviously you fear that what if it's a 7.1,
right.
And obviously we'll just keep on keeping on if it is. But
truth is, it doesn't matter. But I think the bigger truth is, and this is me. Somebody will see this as me blowing my own horn, but I think if you keep listening to the podcast, your variability will get better, your time and range will get better, your blood, and your A1C will just drop. It'll all just sort of start happening. And I think
we need a way for Kristin to spend more time with the podcast, because for her to listen to it with Tess in the car, and we live outside of the city, so they spend 30 minutes in the car. For me, that 30-minute drive is easily a podcast, but I don't think Kristin gets the time.
Well, Kristin, the only thing I can tell you is that your sensibilities may be different than others, but a lot of people listening are listening with their kids. So, and I know a woman who gave this podcast to her kid, and that's what actually got his care moved into his hands. So, I don't know if I say stuff. I think the stuff you're worried about her hearing, she might not understand anyway. So, that's pretty much it. I don't know. Like, do you think it's because, do you not want her to hear something? I should have asked you. Do you not want her to hear something sexual, or do you not want her to hear something that might be about diabetes but not positive?
Well, the whole waking up dead thing is weird to hear. Like, you try not to remind them of that.
Have a rotten morning, but
so let me. So as we go, I'm going to share this with you. And a woman who was a huge part of the online community back in the day, and I still see her there once in a while, told me this story. She said that she kept the idea that there was a scenario with insulin where you could die from her child. Never, ever told him. And one day she got caught in a scenario where they made dinner, gave insulin. She had to run out with another child. So she looked to her older child, 16, 17 years old, and said, listen, I need him to finish that food. And the kid was like, yeah, okay, great, no problem. I'll make sure he eats it. Well, the kid didn't want to eat the food. The mom left, and the older sibling, told them, look, eat that or you're going to die. And that's the first time the kid had ever heard it. And when she got home, he was sitting on the floor, a mess, crying and blubbering. I don't want to die, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know that, in third grade, she needs to understand the full weight of it, but I don't think it hurts for you to start explaining to her that it's important for, safety reasons maybe, or however you come up with saying it, because what you want is one day for her to put on a new kind of pump and look at you and go, "Is this going to be all right?" And I go, "I don't know, maybe." "Is it going to kill me?" I'm like, "I don't know, probably not." Like you want her to be able to roll with that idea, not to be like put off by it, because you don't want her to be somewhere one day when someone who does understand how insulin works completely decides to tell her.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, to me, that's a lot like sex. I'd prefer my daughter understands it leaving the house than when some crazy 16-year-old boy tries to explain it to her. So, I don't know. It's up to you, obviously. I'm not making a judgment, but I really think, I think you got to teach her the whole thing.
Oh, so. Yeah. We'll confront. We'll do it all.
I'm sorry. I could start making test-friendly episodes. But I don't. You might be the only one listening.
She's not that sensitive.
Yeah, you might be the only one listening, Chris.
she hears worse on a day-to-day, I'm pretty sure.
Of course she does. You guys are terrific. I really appreciate it.
But sure, we'll take a personalized podcast. Sure.
Yeah. Would you I'll make an extra day in the week and get right to it for you.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Thank you again.
All right. Thank you.
This episode of the podcast was brought to you by the Contour Next One blood glucose meter. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about it. So hang on for just a second and learn with me. Contour, oh boy, here goes the spelling. ContourNextOne.com. I did it. ContourNextOne.com. When you get there, here is what you're going to learn. First of all, the Contour Next One has its own diabetes management app that's available for iPhone or Android, and it's amazing. It's also compatible with the Apple Health Kit. For those of you with the Apple, you know what I'm saying. This app is going to help you keep track of your blood sugars. Those of you who don't have a continuous glucose monitor can still get a lot of important information from your finger sticks. And that information is going to be actionable for many reasons. One of them, and maybe possibly in my opinion, the most important reason, is that the Contour Next One blood glucose meter is accurate. Super duper ooper accurate. Now that's a technical term that they use to rate meters. It's super duper ooper. There's super duper ooper, there's super duper, there's just ooper, then there's mid-level, not so great. It's a very weird scoring system. This one's at the top. Super duper ooper accurate. The Contour Next One blood glucose meter. You have to check it out. I tell you all the time, it fits in your hand nicely and it's not very big. So it's a great mix of, doesn't take up a lot of space, but I don't fumble with it because it's small. And the test strips, I just love them because they're second chance eligible. You know what I mean? You go in, you try once, you don't quite get the blood drop, you can go back again without wasting a test strip. It's excellent. All this is at ContourNext1.com. You know what else is there? A little button that'll tell you if you can get a free Contour Next One meter. Now, everyone's not eligible, but a lot of you gonna be. So give it a click and find out. The rest of you, you're gonna have to ask your doctor for that Contour Next One blood glucose meter. Do it. Stop walking around with that old nasty meter you've been using forever. You don't even know if it's accurate or not. You have no idea. How long ago did somebody develop that thing you got in your pocket? 10 years ago? You really want like 2010 meters when you could have, super duper ooper? Let me just finish up here by telling you about Touched by Type 1. Please, please, please go to touchedbytype1.org to see the good work they're doing, even in these tough times. Touched by Type 1 needs you more than ever. So go check out what they're doing and see if it doesn't touch your heart. Touch your heart? Touched by Type 1? I feel like you see what I just did there. I mean, honestly, at this point now you owe me going to touchedbytype1.org because, I've made a connection here. Touched by Type 1. They're a great organization. Just go check out what they're doing. See if you're not moved. So I want to thank Kristin and Jeff for coming on the show. They did a really terrific job, and they set all that up. All that technical stuff that they did on their side so that two people could have two separate microphones and sound super clear and be on the podcast. That was them. That's how badly they wanted to come on the show, and I really appreciate it. What else I need you for here? Oh, leave a great review on Apple. I am on Apple. What do they call it? Apple Podcast, if you can. 5 stars. Say something really thoughtful and heartfelt about the podcast so that other people can find it. Thank you so much for sharing the show and for listening. June 2020 was the most downloaded calendar month in the history of the podcast, seriously eclipsing every other month before. That can only happen because people like you share the show with someone else. So I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. I don't know what to say. It was really cool. Hey, while I've got you, if you have a great doctor or endocrinologist, nurse practitioner, and you'd like to share it with someone else, go to juiceboxdocs.com and you can just send in your information. You'll see a great list of doctors all around the world that other listeners wanted to share with you. And if you have one and you'd like to share it with them, send it to me right through juiceboxdocs.com. Also, for the Diabetes Pro Tips, if you just want to revisit or share, diabetesprotip.com. You don't have to go back into the podcast app to find the pro tips. diabetesprotip.com. Leave off the last S. I don't know, just there's no S at the end. It's Diabetes Pro Tip. Anything else? This is me bouncing the microphone against my face, trying to decide if there's anything else. I think I'm done. All right, I'll see you. I think there might be one more episode this week, so check back. Bye-bye.